What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to Behind the Arc Basketball on YouTube. In this video today, I'm going to talk about 20 college basketball teams who are currently impacted by a player and or multiple players on their roster who are currently debating on whether they'll stay in the NBA draft or if they'll decide to go back to college for another season of college basketball. These decisions by these players can ultimately be the deciding factor on how this upcoming season pans out for these 20 teams in the list. But if you didn't know already, the NBA Draft Withdrawal Deadline was recently moved because of COVID-19. It was first supposed to be for college basketball players to withdraw or keep their name in the NBA Draft. That date was supposed to be on June 3rd, and then it was moved back to June 15th, and then recently it was moved back once again to no later than August 3rd. So today I'm going to go over 20 teams on the list here that will be impacted by these upcoming NBA draft decisions in the future. We're going to take a look here. Number 20 on the list happens to be the Tennessee Volunteers, as they have one player currently on the fence with a forward on their roster. His name is Yves Pons. Pons happens to be the SEC's leading shot blocker from this past season. He's a native of France, and he averaged 10.8 points per game and 2.4 blocks per game this past season for the Vols. He did, however, struggle with consistency and free throw shooting. But considering how deep Tennessee's roster is going to be for this upcoming season, losing Yves Pons wouldn't be that massive of a loss, in my opinion, since the Vols already have solid rebounding right behind them with contributors such as John Fulkerson and Josiah Jordan-James. If Yves Pons does leave to go to the NBA draft, the one factor that Tennessee will miss, however, will be his shot blocking abilities. But considering how deep the Vols roster is for next season, with two top 30 recruits coming in as well with Jaden Springer and Keon Johnson, Tennessee, in my opinion, shouldn't drop that much if they do lose Yves Pons. Now I'll take a look here. Number 19 on the list happens to be the Houston Cougars, as they have one player currently on the fence debating if he'll be back once again for Houston. His name is DeJon Jarreau. Houston already suffered two major offseason losses with their top two rebounders. Nate Hinton left to go to the NBA, and Fabian White is out for this upcoming season with an ACL injury. But just like the Houston Rockets in the NBA, the Houston Cougars in college for this upcoming season will most likely have to be forced to play small ball because they just cannot afford to lose any more players, and this team is just loaded with guards. The Cougars here, they have Jarreau on the roster. He is expected to be a starter for this upcoming season. He averaged 9 points per game last season. And the good news, however, for Houston is that even though they're an undersized team with a lot of guards in this roster here, the good news for them is the American is supposed to have a down season, with UConn heading to the Big East, Memphis losing their top players to the NBA draft, Wichita State also losing their top players to the transfer portal, and Cincinnati losing their top players to graduation. The only team that I see that could be surprising in the American and have a chance to compete with Houston for this upcoming season happens to be SMU, who will have a roster of 6 seniors and 4 juniors for this upcoming season. Now I'll take a look here. Number 18 on the list happens to be the UCLA Bruins, as they have one player on the fence. His name is Chris Smith. He is a small forward and shooting guard for UCLA. Chris Smith was the catalyst this past season to right the ship in the correct direction for UCLA with a complete 180 turnaround from the first half of the season to the second. The Bruins started out with an 8-9 record, finished red hot with a 19-12 record. Chris Smith is one of the youngest seniors entering this season in college basketball. If he does stay for UCLA, Chris Smith will be 20 years old since he enrolled as a freshman at UCLA back when he was at the age of 17. Smith led the Bruins in points per game. He averaged 13.1 points per game. He was the only player to score over 10 points per game last season on average for UCLA. If Chris Smith does come back to UCLA, this team right here will be a top 25 team in my opinion. But if Chris Smith does leave to go to the NBA draft, then UCLA will move back to a bubble team. Now I'll take a look here. Number 17 on the list happens to be the South Carolina Gamecocks. They have one player currently on the fence whether he'll stay or go to the NBA. His name is A.J. Lawson, a guard for South Carolina. Any hopes of South Carolina's 2021 NCAA tournament chances here lies in the fate of their leading scorer, A.J. Lawson. Lawson led South Carolina with 13.4 points per game. The Gamecocks will, however, get a key transfer into the mix with Seventh Woods from North Carolina coming over to South Carolina. According to the State.com, head coach Frank Martin plans for A.J. Lawson to be back If Lawson does come back to South Carolina, this team, in my opinion, will be a bubble team. If Lawson does head out the door to go to the NBA draft, then there's a good chance, in my opinion, that South Carolina will miss this upcoming tournament. Now we'll move on here to number 16 on the list. Happens to be the Northern Iowa Panthers, as they have one player currently on the fence whether he'll return back to school, and his name is A.J. Green. Not the football player, by the way, for the Cincinnati Bengals. We're talking about the college basketball player for the Northern Iowa Panthers. He is a guard. A.J. Green led the Missouri Valley Conference in points scored per game this past season. He put his name into the NBA draft. He averaged 19.7 points per game while being the fourth best free throw shooter in the country, shooting the ball at the free throw line just under 92%. As the Panthers are coming off a season with a 25-6 record, but they were an unfortunate victim of a 21-point upset into the hands of Drake in the quarterfinals in the Missouri Valley Conference tournament last season. If A.J. Green does come back, they're sure that he would like to have some revenge and win the tournament for this upcoming season in the Missouri Valley. If Green does, however, go to the NBA draft, then, in my opinion, Loyola Chicago, with 5 seniors in their roster, would jump over Northern Iowa as the number 1 team in the conference, and then it would be Loyola Chicago who would be the favorites to win the Valley for this upcoming season. That is if A.J. Green does head to the NBA draft for Northern Iowa. Now we'll take a look here. Number 15 on the list happens to be the Seton Hall Pirates, as they have one player here with a long last name that has a chance to come back to school or head to the NBA draft. His name is Sandro Mamukelashvili. He's a power forward for Seton Hall. Mamu averaged 11.9 points per game, 6 rebounds per game last season for the Pirates. They had massive losses in the offseason where their leading scorer, Miles Powell, to graduation. Also, 7'2" shot-blocking beast Romero Gill also is off the team as well as he graduated. So Mamu here will be the big man down low that Seton Hall is going to have to lean on for this upcoming season here. Acquiring Bryce Aiken, though, out of Harvard in the transfer portal, that was huge for Seton Hall to put the Pirates right back into the NCAA tournament conversation. If Mamu does, however, end up going to the NBA draft, then Seton Hall's chances would dramatically drop, since the Pirates are without much experience down low there as far as like another player that can play either power forward or center on their roster. Now we'll take a look here. Number 14 on the list happens to be the Colorado Buffaloes, as they are one player in their fence. Their leading scorer and point guard from last season, his name is McKinley Wright IV. Wright averaged 14.4 points per game and 5 assists per game last season for the Buffaloes. Colorado in basically the same position as South Carolina here, in which they cannot afford to lose their top scorer and playmaker from their roster. Despite his 6-foot size, though, Wright had 3 games this past season where he snagged 10 or more rebounds. Colorado already took a significant blow when Tyler Bay decided to keep his name into the NBA draft. In my opinion here, I predict that Colorado will be a bubble team if Wright does come back, but if he does head to the NBA draft, then Colorado will most likely miss this upcoming season's NCAA tournament, since they'll be in desperate need of a new point guard and a playmaker on their roster. Now we'll move on here. Number 13, we take a look at the first team with multi-players here that we'll take a look at. Happens to be the North Carolina State Wolfpack at number 13. They have 2 players, DJ Funderburk and Devon Daniels. Funderburk's a forward, Daniels is a guard. The Wolfpack, with these 2 seniors out of 3 on the roster that has a chance to come back, with Funderburk and Daniels being 2 out of the 3 seniors, they have a massive decision to make if they want to come back for NC State for this upcoming season. Daniels averaged 12.7 points per game. Funderburk averaged 12.8 points per game for the Wolfpack. But with just an extremely competitive ACC conference for this upcoming season, the ceiling here, in my opinion, for NC State would be on the verge of either an 11 or 12 seed in the NCAA tournament that could possibly get a play-in game in the first 4 of the NCAA tournament. That is the ceiling that I predict for NC State, which has basically been the life of a Wolfpack fan here. Being a bubble team has basically been the story of NC State during these past few seasons. But if both of these players go to the NBA, then it's going to be difficult for NC State to even make the tournament for this upcoming season here, as I feel like they're going to struggle for next season if they do have Daniels and Funderburk heading over to the NBA. Now we'll move on to number 12 on the list. Happens to be the Dayton Flyers. Out of the Atlantic 10, they have 2 players currently on the fence whether they'll be back or not, as it happens to be Jalen Crutcher, the point guard for Dayton, and Yves Watson, a guard. Crutcher played in the shadow of Obi Toppin this past season, but Jalen Crutcher had a great season. He managed to average 15 points per game. He led the Flyers in assists per game, and Ibi Watson averaged just over 10 points per game and was the number 4 scorer for the Flyers. Now, I predict that St. Louis and Richmond will be the top 2 teams in the A-10 for this upcoming season, but if Dayton, they still have a chance to make some noise here in the Atlantic 10, and they could possibly be the 3rd place team in the conference. I do predict, though, that the A-10 will be a 2-bid league, but Dayton has the chance to make it a 3-bid league, but that will happen only if Crutcher and Watson both decide to go back to the Flyers. But if Crutcher and Watson do both leave to head to the NBA draft, then the Flyers would fall into the next tier, in my opinion, right below St. Bonaventure, Duquesne, UMass, and Davidson in the A-10. Now we'll move on to number 11 on the list. We'll take a look at the Arkansas Razorbacks. They have a huge decision coming up by Isaiah Joe, their shooting guard on the roster. Isaiah Joe had a massive season for the Razorbacks. He averaged 16.9 points per game. And by the way, he was not the leading scorer for Arkansas. It was Mason Jones who averaged over 22 points per game. But Mason Jones announced that he'll stay in the NBA draft. Now it's up to Isaiah Joe. Joe improved tremendously as a free throw shooter from this past season, with his numbers going up to 89% during his sophomore season. If Isaiah Joe does come back to Arkansas, then Arkansas will be a top 30 team, in my opinion, that should have a solid chance to make the NCAA tournament. Head coach Eric Musselman did a fantastic job, able to work the transfer wire just in case Joe and Jones both ended up leaving to head to the NBA draft, which Jones already did. Now it's up to Joe. Arkansas, though, will have a strong group of transfers heading in, with Justin Smith coming in from Indiana, Vance Jackson heading in from New Mexico, Jalen Tate from Northern Kentucky, and J.D. Note heading in from Jacksonville. If Isaiah Joe does go to the NBA, however, Arkansas, in my opinion, will most likely fall back to being a bubble team. Now we'll take a look here as we're inside the top 10 of these teams as far as decisions that have to be made. This one heads over to the Michigan Wolverines as they have a big decision awaiting from Isaiah Livers, a forward for Michigan. As Isaiah Livers had a significant season this past year, big time helped out the Wolverines. He played 21 games, where he was out for 10 of those games, though, due to an ankle injury. But when Isaiah Livers was on the court for Michigan in those 21 games, Michigan posted a record of 14-7. But when he wasn't on the court for those 10 games, Michigan struggled by going 5-5. Isaiah Livers, he is great from behind the arc, a 40% career three-point shooter. And if not missing those 10 games due to an ankle injury, Isaiah Livers would have led college basketball this past season in free throw shooting at the charity stripe, as he shot the ball at an incredible 95.7% at the free throw line. That number is up from 2 seasons prior during his freshman season, which he only shot the ball at 66.7% at the free throw line during his freshman year. And what's even more impressive here about Isaiah Livers at the free throw line is that he only missed 2 free throws the entire season. He went 44 for 46 at the charity stripe and made a consecutive 36 straight free throws in a row. If Isaiah Livers does stay, I have Michigan as a top 25 team. If Livers does head to the NBA, though, Michigan, in my opinion, will be on the bubble. Now move on here to number 9 on the list happens to be the Alabama Crimson Tide, as they have a big decision coming up with John Petty, a guard in their roster. John Petty was a top 30 recruit out of high school in the class of 2017. He was actually ranked ahead, just ahead of Trey Young in the recruiting rankings out of high school. Petty has a huge decision to make here, as he averaged 14.5 points per game last season in a high-scoring, high-flying attack with Nate Oates as head coach for the Crimson Tide. Petty also improved his three-point shooting to a solid 44% from behind the arc. He did struggle, however, with consistency last season, where he had games where he absolutely went off. He had 39 points against Stanford, 34 points against Iowa State, but then he had games that were just the complete opposite, complete duds there. For John Petty of Alabama, he had 5 points against Rhode Island, 4 points against LSU, and only 1 point in 34 minutes in his season finale against Missouri. Now, if John Petty, he would be one of 4 seniors on the roster if he does stay for Alabama. And with Petty in the lineup, this Alabama Crimson Tide team would be right probably around the top 35 team, in my opinion. But if Petty does leave to go to the NBA draft, then Alabama would take an unfortunate hit, as their NCAA tournament chances will drop. Now take a look here, number 8 on the list, as this team has a trio of players we're still waiting for. Happens to be the Gonzaga Bulldogs. 3 players here. The biggest known player on the roster happens to be Filip Petrusev, who's a forward for Gonzaga. They also have on the fence Joel Ayayi and Corey Kispert, as Ayayi is a guard, Kispert is a small forward. All three of these players have the chance to head back to Gonzaga or go to the NBA draft. Even if all three of these players for Gonzaga do head to the NBA draft, then, in my opinion, Gonzaga will still be the long shot favorites to win the WCC. Petrusev will be the biggest loss, however, as he was the leading scorer this past season with 17.5 points per game and also had just under 8 rebounds per game. Corey Kispert was Gonzaga's second leading scorer this past season, and Joel Ayayi improved tremendously from freshman season, where he barely did anything, to sophomore season, where he averaged just over 10 points per game. But if all three of these players return back to Gonzaga, this team right here will be a top 3 team in the nation that will most likely not lose more than 4 games, in my opinion, when the Zags are just only going to get better if these 3 come back and add into the mix a 5-star recruit with Jalen Suggs, as this team is going to be super duper dangerous for this upcoming season. Now we'll take a look here. Number 7 on the list happens to be the Michigan State Spartans, as Michigan State has a big decision awaiting from Xavier Tillman, a forward for Michigan State. He had a monster season here. Tillman coming off a season where he averaged a double-double, 13.7 points per game, 10.3 rebounds per game for Sparty. Also, he had 2.1 blocks per game, and he was an absolute beast inside, shooting the ball at 55% from the floor. Tillman is projected to be a borderline first-round draft pick in the NBA draft. He is most likely going to be a second-rounder, though, if he does end up going to the NBA, but Tom Izzo did a great job working the transfer portal in the offseason and the year prior to get Joey Hauser as a transfer over from Marquette. He is much needed since Joey Hauser is able to help out on the boards. That is, if Xavier Tillman does leave. It's just going to be massive here. If Michigan State is able to get back Xavier Tillman for this upcoming season, that will be huge. That would put Sparty right back into being a top 8 team, in my opinion, in the nation if Xavier Tillman does decide to return back to college. Now we'll move on here, and the number 6 on the list happens to be the Arizona State Sun Devils. Big decisions coming up by these 2 players right here. Remy Martin, a point guard, and Alonzo Verge, a guard for Arizona State. Both of these players just going to have a significant impact, whether they'll stay or whether they'll go. There's a big difference here between if both of them stay, this team will be solid, but if both of them leave, then it's going to be big yikes for Arizona State. Remy Martin, he was the second leading scorer in the Pac-12 conference, right behind Peyton Pritchard this past season, averaged 19.1 points per game, as Alonzo Verge happened to be the 6th man off the bench for the Sun Devils. He played off the bench. He averaged 14.6 points per game as well for Arizona State. Remy Martin had multiple games with 20 or more points scored. Alonzo Verge for Arizona State made tremendous improvements throughout the course of the season with his scoring production, especially during the last month for Arizona State. If both of these players head back to the Sun Devils, this team will be a top 25 team, in my opinion. But if both of these players do head to the NBA draft, then Arizona State's going to take a significant blow there. And in my opinion, they won't even be in the NCAA tournament picture, as this team would happen to lose their top 4 scorers from last season. But if both of these players, Martin and Verge, do come back, watch out, because this team's going to be dangerous. They'll have a triple threat as far as guards that's going to be difficult to stop, as you add in a 5-star recruit as well for this upcoming season with Josh Christopher to the roster. Now move on to number 5 here. Another team awaiting some big decisions happens to be the Illinois Fighting Illini, with 2 players currently on the fence, whether they'll be back to Illinois or go to the NBA. That happens to be their point guard, star player Ayo Dosunmu, and also their center, Kofi Cockburn. Both of these are the 2 top scorers from this past season for Illinois. They have a huge decision to make here, as Dosunmu led the Fighting Illini with 16.6 points per game. Cockburn was the leading rebounder for Illinois this past season. If both of these players return to school, then Illinois should be able to snap that 8-season NCAA tournament drought. They should be in good shape to make the tournament next season if Dosunmu and Cockburn does come back. But if both of these players do leave to go to the NBA draft, then Illinois will take a significant hit, as I see it's going to probably be tough for Illinois to be back if both of these players don't remain on the roster for this upcoming season, and that's given how stacked the Big Ten looks for this upcoming season. Now move on here, number 4. On the list, we talk about 3 more players once again here, still awaiting decisions, and it happens to be for the LSU Tigers. They have 3 players here, a trio: Trenton Watford, a small forward, Darius Days, a forward, and Javonte Smart, a guard. All 3 of these players still on the fence whether they'll return back to Baton Rouge. So I have projected here, if these 3 players do stay, I have projected LSU to be just outside the top 25. Trendon Watford had a phenomenal season his freshman year. He averaged 13.6 points per game, just over 7 rebounds per game. Javonte Smart, he averaged 12.5 points per game, and Darius Days averaged just over 11. If all three of these players, however, decide to go to the NBA, then LSU would take a severe hit as this team will lose their top 4 out of 5 scorers from last season, and that will mostly mean that this team would probably have a difficult chance to get back to the NCAA tournament. Now we'll take a look here at number 3 on the list for big-time decisions coming up. 2 players here for the Baylor Bears, both guards for the team, and happens to be the top 2 scorers from last season. Jared Butler and Maseo Teague. Jared Butler led Baylor with 16 points per game. Maseo Teague averaged just under 14. Jared Butler was clutch this past season. He gave the Baylor Bears all the opportunities to be at the top of these rankings here, as he was just on fire as the closer when it came to pulling out close games for Baylor. Now, if both of these players here, Jared Butler and Maseo Teague, do head back to Baylor, then this team, in my opinion, could be the national champion for this upcoming season, as they could possibly win the program's first ever national title. And it wouldn't shock me if Baylor's up at number 1 in these rankings in the AP Top 25 for quite a bit of time for this upcoming season. Now, if both of these players here, Butler and Teague, do decide, though, to head to the NBA draft, then Baylor would drop back, in my opinion, towards the end of the top 10 and be back around the teens area, most likely anywhere from being around 10 to 12 in my rankings prediction. Now we'll take a look here on number 2. We're down to the final 2 teams in the list. This one happens to be the Stanford Cardinal. Big decision coming up by Tyrell Terry, a guard from Stanford. He had a phenomenal freshman season, as he is predicted to be a late first round to second round NBA draft pick coming up. Tyrell Terry, major decision to make if he wants to help out Stanford be back in the NCAA tournament for the first time since 2014. Terry had a great freshman season, averaged just under 15 points per game. He shot the ball as well, just under 41% from behind the arc, and was an 89% free throw shooter. Next season, though, Stanford, they're going to be loaded. They'll be even better as they bring in 5-star freshman Zaire Williams. If Tyrell Terry does come back to Stanford, this team's going to be dangerous. They will be a top 15 team with that potential, in my opinion, for this upcoming season. But if Tyrell Terry does leave to go to the NBA, then they're going to be a top 30 team most likely for this upcoming season. And now there happens to be one team. Big decision coming up by this player right here, and it happens to be for the Iowa Hawkeyes, as we are talking about Luka Garza, as he had an absolutely incredible season, standout season for the Iowa Hawkeyes this past season, the center for Iowa. Now, if Luka Garza does stay for his senior season, then he will most likely be that preseason pick to win the 2021 National Player of the Year. Luka Garza, coming off a spectacular season, lights out, as he ranked 5th in the nation with 23.9 points per game, also snagged 9.8 rebounds per game. Just how consistent Luka Garza was producing from the floor? Well, he scored 20 or more points in the last 16 consecutive games of this past season. It would be incredible, though, if Luka Garza is able to replicate those scoring numbers once again, because Jordan Bohannon and CJ Frederick are back healthy for Iowa. They should be able to receive more touches for this upcoming season here. If Luka Garza does come back for his final season at Iowa, then the Hawkeyes have a legitimate shot at a deep run at the NCAA tournament with a possible shot at a Final Four. If Luka Garza, however, does leave to head to the NBA draft, then I have Iowa dropping to around the 20s in my rankings, since they'll still have a healthy Jordan Bohannon and CJ Frederick back, and you'll add along Joe Wieskamp into the mix, along with the McCaffrey brothers and Jack Nunge. So that's a wrap here to this video. 20 college basketball teams who have been impacted by the NBA draft decisions of these players who have yet to decide if they'll stay in college or go to the NBA. We are awaiting here massive decisions by these college basketball players to determine the fate for this season here, for these upcoming teams, as far as how they're going to perform for this upcoming season. As we'll take a look at that. We're going to have the NBA Draft Withdrawal Deadline is on August 3rd, so we'll know by August 3rd what the decision happens to be for all these players on the list. Thanks so much for watching this video. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe to my channel. Also, feel free to check out all the other great content I have going on this channel, as this is Behind the Arc Basketball on YouTube.